Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Judy Bruner, and with me today is Dennis Lewis. We want to welcome you to today's webinar on the topic of deterring and responding to acts of extreme school violence. Now, you'll notice in the title of the presentation that we've added the words finding the balance. We did that because it really is a matter of balance when it comes to school safety. In other words, what can we do to provide the most protection for those we serve while preserving the kind of school climate that's warm and caring and gives students, parents, and staff the type of feeling that promotes learning. You may also notice that our presentation and note-taking guide are both pretty detailed. We did this intentionally due to the critical nature of the topic. We wanted to make sure that we were very explicit with our remarks. Well, like all good teachers, Dennis and I have instructional objectives for today's session. Our first objective will be to help you understand the dynamics of attacks on schools and the impact that these attacks have on a school's planning process. Now, while there are many similarities between assaults, whether it's at a theater or a mall or a school, those of us that work in schools each day understand that the school environment really is unique. Our second objective will be to help you incorporate what we call active shooter lethal assailant response procedures into your emergency response plan. In the past, many school emergency response plans didn't necessarily differentiate between an intruder and a lethal assailant. And what most folks recognize now is that they are not the same, and each one needs procedures that acknowledges those differences. The third objective will be to help you establish daily, monthly, and annual practices that are designed to keep all staff at optimum performance. The short-term suggestions we'll make, for the most part, will require little, if any, financial commitment from you, and we did that knowing that schools have limited resources. And then the final objective for today will be to help you address the need for facility design in deterring the act while minimizing loss of life and injury. Now, some of these suggestions will have an associated cost.
Okay, and looking at extreme acts of school violence, we wanted to take just a few minutes and talk a little bit about the dynamics that take place. You know, these events are very fluid. They happen over an extremely short period of time, and so it's really important in working with frontline school staff that while there are procedures in place, they fully understand that in many cases they're going to be making decisions literally on the spur of the moment with little, if any, guidance from the office. We also wanted to take a few minutes and talk with you a little bit about some of the common denominators of not only the perpetrator, but the staff and the students as far as to what they will most likely be feeling and occurring during the event. Specific to the perpetrator, and I think everyone probably has already some understanding of this, but they're not going to be deterred by routine security practices. And while it is a good time to go back and revisit emergency management plans and general security practices, for the most part, these perpetrators will not be deterred by the routine type stuff that we might do, such as visitor check-in procedures and those type of things. The rampage shooter, the perpetrator, will continue to harm until unable to do so. Targets are no longer available, or most likely law enforcement or others neutralize them. And really, on the latter part, that's really what it comes down to. If you think back to the incident at Springfield, Oregon, back in 1999, the perpetrator being Kip Kinkle, during an attempt to reload his weapon, it was students in the cafeteria that tackled him and neutralized him until other adults and law enforcement arrived. So typically, these perpetrators will continue to inflict harm until, again, they run out of targets or somebody neutralizes them. They'll be indiscriminate with lethal force. Again, these are not targeted events where the target is a particular staff member or a particular student. This will simply be a case where they will just indiscriminately administer their lethal force. And then lastly, they're suicidal in addition to homicidal. And in most cases, they will choose that course of action when confronted with the possibility of capture. As a side note, as we talk a little bit about the response procedures today, and Judy alluded to this earlier, that we have titled it the active shooter lethal assailant. There is a tendency to look at these perpetrators from the perspective of a firearm issue, but you must keep in mind, and all staff must keep in mind, that this really applies to any type of lethal force that an assailant might use.
Okay, well now let's think for just a minute about how staff might respond to this type of an event. Well, staff is going to be impacted by the characteristics of extreme stress. In other words, they will experience some physiological changes that will make it very challenging to think on their feet. And Dennis will talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation. Staff won't have time to find the emergency plan or to locate any type of written procedures, in all likelihood. Things will happen very quickly, and what a staff member does or doesn't do at that time may have some very serious consequences. You also want to remember that each staff member will respond as they've practiced, trained, or pre-planned. That's why Dennis and I think problem solving through the use of tabletop exercises is so very, very important. I can tell you as a former principal that I really don't know of a better way to teach staff their individual responsibilities within a crisis management plan other than to periodically use what's called a tabletop exercise. And finally, what we've learned about the timing of these events is that there will be very few minutes for students and staff to take some type of action to protect themselves or others. In other words, it's happening very, very quickly. And as fast as law enforcement can arrive on the scene, sometimes it's just not fast enough, so staff and kids may have to take some initiative themselves. So let's think for just a minute about how kids might respond in this type of an event. Well, first, they're going to look to the teacher or the nearest adult for guidance and protection. And, quite frankly, this is going to be true for students of all ages. Now, it may be easier to redirect the attention of students at younger ages, but my experience, honestly, with high school and middle school students is that if they've practiced and had opportunities to discuss what they should do during this type of an event with an adult that they trust and respect, they'll be far more likely to comply with commands and directives during a school emergency. Now, you want to keep in mind that some kids may have had life experiences that may impact their understanding of what's going on. Some examples might be students that have experienced some type of traumatic event in their lives, or it might be students with some special learning needs. And then finally, don't forget that not only will you be experiencing these physiological changes that Dennis will talk about shortly, but students are going to have some of these same limitations. In other words, it's going to be very, very challenging and difficult, if not impossible, to analyze the situation and come up with a response. Everybody's going to be impacted by the characteristics of extreme stress.
Okay, talking a little bit about stress. One of the problems that we confront in working with school staff on this topic of extreme school violence is that for most school personnel, they will not have experienced the extreme stress that comes with this type of an event. And I guess in some ways we're thankful for that, but in some ways that's also somewhat problematic. So just real quickly, just to give you a feel for what we're talking about here, under extreme stress, there's going to be a number of things that will occur physiologically to your staff members, and they also need to recognize this as well. And these will things that will clearly impact their ability to respond. There's the obvious physical traits such as increased heart rates and respirations, but more importantly, it's the things that decrease that cause us the most problems in responding to these type of events. Literally under extreme stress, optical systems will become extremely narrow, referred to as tunnel vision or whatever term you like, but the ability to really be able to focus and see is impacted. Auditory is significantly diminished, and most importantly, your ability to analytically think and reason is severely impacted on that. And it goes back to an earlier slide that Judy talked about, where staff truly are going to respond to the way they practiced or the way they pre-planned. Again, for most staff, they won't have the real-life experiences necessary, and if all else fails, the will to survive will kick in. But hopefully, what we would hope would take place with staff is they'll respond to the way they practiced or they pre-planned.
All right, well, let's take a poll and see what you guys have out there. The question that we're posing to you is, does your emergency response plan have, excuse me, Dennis, you'll have to move that over. Excuse me. Does your emergency response plan have specific active shooter lethal assailant procedures differentiating from other types of intruder events requiring classrooms to be secured? In other words, in your plan, have you differentiated between an intruder and someone that might be considered a lethal assailant? So let's see what you know. And some of you may not be sure, and that's very understandable too, because the thinking on this has evolved over the last few years.
Well, it looks like a higher percentage is coming in with the answer being no, and I think we would probably expect that to some degree. If you go back and look at emergency response plans 5-10 years ago, it was very common for those ERPs to have a single intruder procedure that had a corresponding lockdown practice. What Judy and I strongly recommend now is that you still maintain a standard intruder type procedure, for the aggressive parent that comes in and refuses to go through the visitor screening process.
Or a non-custodial parent wanting to pick up a child.
But in turn also have the active shooter lethal assailant procedure that is for those extreme incidents. It's like just about everybody's completed. We'll give it just a few more seconds here. And Arlen, can they see the poll results there?
Yeah, I did share the poll results, but it's closed now.
Okay.
Okay, let's take a look at the emergency response plan. And in advance, each of you were sent an active shooter lethal assailant template procedure that we developed. And again, this will be separate from what we would call a standard intruder type procedure. This is going to be the active shooter lethal assailant, and we've designed it for both inside and outside school type stuff. To just kind of quickly go over this with you as you get this in front of you. It's pretty straightforward, and again, it's not real lengthy as far as detail. It's going to be important to remember that staff under stress, under extreme stress, are going to literally be able to recall literally short pieces of information, so we've tried to design it that way. Implementing the full lockdown procedures, any available method, whether it be through the intercom or ever how you can activate your procedures there. The contact of the 911, and then the staying in contact with 911 if possible, and the caveat is safe to do so. For the active shooter, this would be the office procedure. Clearly evacuating office staff and others if safe to do so, and order all persons on the exterior of the school to move away from the campus. And this is why we think it's important for school facilities to actually have the capability to communicate on the outside of their facilities through speaker systems. If the assailant's outside the school, make sure that all interior doors are secure, take shelter in a room, and remain concealed until told otherwise to do so by law enforcement. And then the last one, the one that probably makes everyone just a little bit squeamish, and we understand that. If loss of life appears imminent, consider attempting to neutralize the assailant using any means available, but only as a last resort. And this will be for the classroom procedures for the classroom teachers and others in various offices out through the building other than the main office. Again, following instructions from position of authority if they're in contact, and then detailing out the lockdown procedures. And hopefully these lockdown procedures we've given you are fairly similar to what are already in your plans. Continuing on with the classroom procedures, barricading the doorway if forced entry to the classroom is feared or imminent. The second one there, you'll note, may be a little problematic for many schools based on design features. We do recommend that there be a secondary method of egress from every ground level classroom. That we find that's not always the case, but that needs to be an option that staff can use. And then again, if the assailant gains access to the classroom and loss of life appears imminent, and that's probably going to be the case, then take whatever action is necessary to neutralize the assailant. And this includes providing instructions to others to assist in their own protection. And that's obviously, as Judy indicated, easier said for the older kids to assist than it is for the younger kids.
So in terms of others, Dennis, you're thinking of?
Well, we've used the word others in there, but quite frankly, in a classroom setting, it's going to be one or two adults and the students. And if you look back to what's coming out of some of the reports out of Sandy Hook, there was some indication that even at that young age, like, there were at least 1 or 2 students that took it upon themselves to try to either protect themselves or protect others.